extend a warm Authors and Innovators welcome to Professor Kelly Richmond Pope. She's the Dr. J. Barry Epstein Endowed Professor of Forensic Accounting at DePaul University in Chicago. She is a nationally recognized expert on risk forensic accounting, white-collar crime research, and she's also an award-winning educated researcher and documentary filmmaker. Dr. Pope, welcome so much. And I want to just say, Fool Me Once is probably one of the most entertaining books about accounting I've ever read. So thank you for joining us. This is really a must-read for anyone who wants to build a culture of integrity and also wants to assess, frankly, their own internal audit function. Kelly, what do you attribute fraud to? It seems like just reading this, it can be perpetrated by anyone.
Well, I think there's a couple things. So first, thank you so much for having me. I want to say that, and thank you for reading the book and sharing the book. But I think that fraud is attributed to a couple of things. One, we are very trusting, and just as a culture, we don't often feel comfortable pushing back or raising questions. So I think just this inherent nature of trust is the first issue. Secondly, we don't want to whistleblow. So we're very doubtful of what we may think we know. And for whatever reason, we live in a society where we just can't be wrong. And so you would rather be quiet than be wrong. And so that silence can then allow for a fraud to perpetuate and no one say anything for a very long time. So I think those two issues on each end is part of the reason why fraud is just growing and growing and growing. I also think that we tend to be very overconfident as people. So we don't think that it is bad as it could be. If we steal some money from an organization, the worst case scenario, I'll get fired. You never think that you could actually go to prison for it. And you can. You really can. So things are never as bad as we think that they can be. So I think that those just variables are part of the reason why fraud keeps happening.
And one of the most riveting examples, you really start early in the book, Rita Crundwell. Tell us about her and what happened.
So I did a documentary called All the Queen's Horses back in 2017, and it was about Rita Crundwell. And she was the city comptroller of a small town called Dixon, Illinois, where she embezzled over $53.7 million over 20 years. And everybody trusted her. And it was a town where there were very few internal controls, which is not unlike a lot of organizations. A lot of organizations have a powerful person that they trust. And although we may have internal controls, we might not always check them to make sure they are still working properly, because sometimes we believe that people are the internal control and they're never that. So that's who Rita was. That's what the fraud was. And what happened in Dixon is known as the largest municipal fraud in U.S. history.
Wow. And she didn't just do it overnight. She was trusted for a long time, it sounds
Very
like.
very long time. I think for a very long time, we have had a mindset of what we think a person that commits a crime looks like. And it's not Rita. That's not the profile. So it made it easy for her to fly right under the radar or live in plain sight for very long, because she's not who you think. We have if you asked any of us to take a sheet of paper out and draw what a felon looks like, I would argue everybody's picture is going to look similar. They're going to have a ski mask on. They may have a black turtleneck on. They might have a mean grimace on their face. Everyone's picture is going to be very similar, and it's not going to look like Rita Crundwell.
What are some of the red flags if you're talking to our CEOs and future CEOs, Kelly? What do you want them to think about? What are some of the red flags? And then how can they prevent being a victim or being victimized?
So when we talk about what are some of the red flags, I think it's really industry specific. So
okay.
I do think that, but I will say this. I will say that one of the reasons why I'm a proponent that everybody should have a basic understanding of accounting. You should take your financial accounting class. a managerial accounting class, and if you can take a financial statement analysis class.
So
Yeah,
no
we
matter
saw
what
it.
the industry, they
No
got
matter
to know basic accounting.
for no matter what the industry, it all rolls up into the four basic financial statements. So I was just teaching this in my class last night because when you think about it, there are some accounts that just have to go together. For example, if you're telling your board, oh, our revenues have increased. If your revenues have increased, at some point there should be some type of increase in cash, depending on what you're selling. Or if your revenues are increasing, you should have your inventory of whatever you sell should be going down. So there should be some relationships between some of the accounts. Typically, not typically, always. Typically, I'll say typically, there's a balance sheet effect and an income statement effect. So if you understand what accounts go on each statement, it allows you to just ask some basic questions. And so when you think about why would somebody want to overstate revenue? Why would someone want to say revenue is higher than it should be? Because the higher the revenue, that means the higher your net operating income is going to be. So just understanding some basic relationships is why people might want to do some of the things that they do. So you might not want to include your sales returns and allowances. You might not want to deduct that number out of your sales number because it makes your sales number look bigger. So I think that some of the red flags are just looking at those financial statements and understanding which accounts should move together. If someone's telling me business is good, sales are strong, then there are some things that should be happening.
What great advice. Everyone, lawyers, including lawyers, ought to know some basic accounting. What are the other red flags or things that people can think about? You talk about people going on vacation and just being colleagues with one another, sharing passwords. What could possibly go wrong?
Well, I want to go back for 1 second before I answer that, because I don't want our listeners to think that it's just financial matters, because it's non-financial red flags as well. There's a story in the book about this pharmacist by the name of Dr. Robert Courtney. And he had diluted hundreds of thousands of prescriptions, and people weren't getting the proper medical chemotherapy treatment that they thought. The red flag was that the nurse noticed that her cancer patients weren't exhibiting the typical cancer side effects.
Right.
And so she happened to she put that in the back of her mind, but then she was talking to the pharmaceutical sales rep, and he was saying, how are things going? And she said, oh my goodness, we are so busy. We are slammed. And he said, I'm surprised that you're slammed because your sales from your pharmacist aren't high enough to match what you're saying. If you're so busy, then he would be ordering more from me. So things have to make sense. And so red flags are not always financial. Sometimes they're non-financial.
That was a terrific story in the book. And I also liked, as I mentioned, the idea that just being collegial can also lead to this. You talked about people going on vacation and having this culture of sort of covering for each other, sharing passwords. If you'll just cover this for me, I'll take care of it. Those are the kind of things that can slip through cracks too, it feels like.
Sure, and we think that it's a kind gesture. If I said, Larry, listen, just log on as me. I know you need to get this done. Just go ahead, log on as me. I trust you. And for all I know, you could log on and have a field day doing something. Who knows that you wouldn't? We're just doing hypothetically, of course.
Yeah.
But we are so trusting, and we feel like we know people so well. And we really never know what what they're totally going through. So it's just, we have to remember that internal controls are to protect us all. They are to protect us all. Protect us from ourselves. And that's what we actually need, more than we think we do.
Well stated. And this is so much a book also about the human condition. You talk about different categories of offenders, the narcissist, somebody it's accidental, or the righteous kind of offender. Can you give the potential readers and our audience a sense of what that looks like?
Sure. What I wanted to do is I wanted to open this fraud universe, if you will, to a larger audience, because a lot of times when we are watching shows or listening to true crime podcasts, what we're listening to is a fascinating story about an intentional perpetrator, somebody that sets out to defraud. And we find it so fascinating because we know I would never do that. I'm never going to be Bernard Madoff. I'm never going to do something like that. I'm never going to intentionally defraud someone. However, you could see yourself as an accidental perpetrator or a righteous perpetrator. Accidental perpetrator is a people pleaser. Your boss asks you to do something, you do it, you ask no questions, you never push back. You just keep everybody happy and you don't feel comfortable. You can be highly introverted. You just don't feel comfortable saying, well, can you explain why, or does that match our compliance rules? You never would do that. Then the righteous perpetrator is a superstar. You still the star of the company. They are the rainmaker. They have the best client, and you keep them happy. And so sometimes people that are so hovering above everybody else, they don't think the rules even have to apply to them. And so sometimes we don't enforce the rules around them. And so that person can bend the system to help someone outside because they feel like they're doing a favor to someone, and at the same time they can still break a rule. So I wanted people to understand that those kinds of cases can also be perpetrators. And we might empathize with those stories a little bit differently than the intentional perpetrator.
Oh, I think that's so well put. You also talk about whistleblowers, people
Yeah.
who really ought to be speaking up. Why don't we embrace them always?
You know, we are, I think we're fearful of people that have that kind of courage to speak out when everybody else won't. We secretly might want to be like them, but we secretly hate on them at the same time because we can't do it. And like when you step out and do something that no one else can do, that's often not a good trait to have. And so I just like I talked about perpetrators, there are categories. There are categories of whistleblowers. You can either be an accidental whistleblower and a noble whistleblower or a vigilante whistleblower. Vigilante whistleblower is where we get the term snitch, rat, tattletale. They fit there, but there are these other two categories that you might find yourself in.
So how do you see technology trends, particularly AI, playing into playing into some of this going forward? What are you telling your students, Kelly, about the world of forensic accounting changing because of technology?
I think about the AI conversation is a tough one because I feel like AI is just an umbrella where there's so many things that fall under it. There is
Sure.
AI for good. I mean, you think about it, if you use Grammarly and you're sending an important email to someone and you put your draft email through Grammarly, that's an AI tool that is helping you. But I think that AI used for bad will make it harder to tell real people from impersonated people. It'll make it harder to tell if an email is truly coming from the person that you think it is or isn't because you can impersonate. I could probably use an AI tool, Larry, and sound exactly like you, call your bank and request money, and they would believe that it's you because I have scraped the internet so where I can answer so many personal identifying pieces of information about you because I've used a tool to figure it out. I could probably even dub your voice and sound like you. So I think AI can really be used for bad as well. So it's going to be sometimes harder for the untrained person to be able to identify a fraud, especially an identity theft fraud when it's happening. So AI makes it challenging for sure. I don't tell my students anything because AI changes every day. It changes every day. So I don't know what to tell them beyond pay attention, slow your mind down so you can think about what are those red flags, because the AI being used is going to make it so much harder to identify the red flags because they're going to look like regular flags. So they won't wave in your face in the same way. So, I went to a conference once and there was a person that was doing a session on deep fakes. And what he did was he showed two pictures. You pick out the one that's a deep fake. You had to really study hard to find that the eyes weren't separated right. So it's going to require a type of concentration that we tend to not pay attention to because what do they say? Our attention spans are 2 seconds now. So it's going to be harder to get people to stop and just study so they don't get defrauded.
Even more reason to do some deeper reading. Can you tell us what you're reading these days?
You know, I am reading. I just ordered one book called Memphis and another book called The Other Black Girl, which is adapted for a Hulu series. So I'm watching the series and reading the book at the same time. So those are the two books I'm just they actually just came right before we started talking. So
Oh,
I'll
that's
start
terrific.
reading those maybe next week. I'm in the process of listening to my girlfriend's one of my best friends in the world. Her name is Dr. Blair Kelly. She just wrote a book called Black Folk. It's out, and the audio book just came out today. So I will be listening to that tonight.
Oh, terrific. Sounds like a great lineup. Well, I want to thank Professor Kelly Richmond Pope. I want everyone who's listening to us to pick up her book, Fool Me Once, Scams, Stories, and Other Secrets from the $1 Trillion Fraud Industry. Dr. Kelly Richmond Pope, thank you so much for joining us. Hope folks will buy this book.
Thank you.